It's an issue no parent wants to hear. But this year alone, a lot of teenagers will commit suicide. And the added tragedy here is when kids are being bullied, the school does nothing about it. You report to the school district, and they do nothing. For the majority of the 6 years on the show, we focused on a bunch of bullying. In this first story right here, last week a 14-year-old committed suicide. The parents reported to the school, and the school did not update them. Now new developments coming in as lawmakers are pushing for a House bill that would require all schools to report the incident. Then the school would say it would be up to the student or the parent to transfer to school or expel the bully. But the question is, could it happen? Let's take a look.
Terry and Robin Badger think House Bill 1483 could have saved their son's life. Under the proposed law, schools would be required to investigate allegations of bullying and report them to both the parents of the alleged victim and the bully. If those allegations were found out to be true, the victim could switch schools, and if they didn't want to, it is the bully that would have to go. Robin and Terry Badger sit wrapped in overwhelming grief. It covers them like the quilt on their lap, made from the sports jerseys their 13-year-old son Terry has worn since he was 4 years old.
His drive was to be an MLB player.
But that's never going to happen now. Robin and Terry buried their youngest child yesterday after he took his own life last week, leaving a video behind telling his parents why.
His exact words were, "They made fun of me every day and I hate my life. And I'm going to kill myself." That's exactly what he said.
Terry's parents say he got picked on for his clothes and his sneakers.
He wore them to school one time and then put them in his closet because his kids made fun of him. And he would never wear them again.
Then there was the time the elder Terry says his son made him recut his hair after getting made fun of for his haircut.
He said, "Dad, I'm not going back to school. I'm not going to get made fun of anymore."
And there were jokes about his weight.
There was a kid that told him he was fat and he just needed to go shoot himself.
The Badgers say they reported the bullying to Covington Middle School in November.
I basically told them that my kid is very, very upset and to the point where he doesn't want to come back to the school.
After that, nothing. No updates from the school or Terry when they asked how he was.
He had a
He
good
kept
poker face.
everything in. That's just him. He carried the weight on his shoulders.
Finally, though, say the Badgers, young Terry couldn't carry that weight anymore and broke under it last week. Now they're turning to their community and lawmakers, asking them to do something to stop this from happening to another child and family.
Do we want to keep experiencing this with kids? We don't need to put any more kids in the ground.
No.
We reached out to the school district for comment. They called what happened a tragedy and say they are bringing in an independent investigator to look into these allegations of bullying. House Bill 1483 has been assigned to the Senate's Education and Career Development Committee, but so far it has not been scheduled for a hearing. At the State House, Emily Longnecker, 13 News.
It's too late to start investigating now. That should have been investigated in the first place. Let me explain why. I'll tell you this. If your child is being bullied and you go to the school district and say, "Hey, my child's being bullied," they would have had more detail and say, "Okay, well, who are these students here? Give them the name, so and so," and yet they would investigate this, right? Nope. They would keep investigating this, not giving out all parents updates until the investigation is complete. We have superintendents, principals, superintendents. Nobody wants to stop it. And so they would just rather sweep it under the carpet and say, "We don't care. We do not have a bullying problem." A lot of schools just come to you saying, "We don't have a bullying problem." There's no bullying problem going on here. Of course you do. If you've got a bullying problem, you need to figure out what it is and start realizing, hey, we have a bullying problem. Let's solve the problem. And personally, when you deal with stories about people who have committed suicide, it makes you wonder what the hell is going on in your school. There needs to be tougher laws about this. And schools need to be required to follow the law. If states find that schools are not following this law, the state can come in and fire everybody, shut down the school for like 6 months or so, suspend the school for like 6 months until someone steps up to the plate and says, hey, we need to solve this problem. If we don't solve this problem, we could be out forever. So I am glad that I'm glad something's being done about this. Somebody has stepped up to the plate and say, hey, every school has a bullying problem. Let's fix it. If you think I'm going for 48 hours, bullying words can kill. Damn right I am. I would show it to you, but then CBS would block me. It's going to happen probably on Daily Motion. We won't know. Still ahead, the Islanders win from Alabama. Chris Thomas will give us the latest. Next, though, back screws. You know those screws we put in the back. But what's really going on? Dr. Timothy Johnson with an investigation. Stay with us. It's a fact that 80% of us will have back pain sometime during our lives. Now, there was a surgical treatment years ago using back screws. Every year, tens of thousands of these screws are injected in the spines. But these cases probably go unreported. How can this happen? Today, you're going to visit some people in Lake Charles who say they've had enough of this. Here's Dr. Timothy Johnson.
Lake Charles is a town of 76,000 people in southwest Louisiana. The area is rich in oil and is just upriver from the Gulf of Mexico, which makes it ideal for oil refineries and chemical plants. But Lake Charles is also the scene of a burning controversy about a medical device for back surgery. A controversy that raises questions about how thousands of patients across the country became virtual guinea pigs. At the heart of this potential scandal are a group of patients in Lake Charles who were told they needed special back surgery, and then ended up with canes and braces and ruined lives after screws and plates were implanted in their backs. Some had previous back surgery that had failed. Others had simple ruptured discs. Unfortunately, the screws that were supposed to help them broke.
It got to where when the plate was in here, it felt like somebody had a knife in my back.
My back felt like it was being pulled apart, like something was behind me and something was in front of me, just pulling.
I put my wife and child through hell every day, because of this.
Screws and plates are used in back surgery when there is a concern about the stability of the spine after surgery. In a typical operation, bone from the vertebra is removed. Then, to stabilize the spine, screws are inserted through plates into the part of the vertebra called the pedicle. The risks of the operation are frightening. The pedicle is right next to the spinal column and emerging spinal nerves. If the screws break or are inserted incorrectly, the results can be catastrophic, including permanent nerve damage. And the screws, as first developed in the early 80s, did often break. Nearly 1 in 3, according to one early study. They broke so often they had to be repeatedly redesigned. The screws in Willie Gilbert tore his vertebra, causing loss of feeling in his legs and bladder problems. Joe Williamson suffered damage to the nerves leading to his bladder when 4 screws broke. Carol Carter had 2 broken screws that had to be removed.
And ever since then, I've had pain in both of my legs. I can hardly walk. Sometimes the leg will go out, I fall, and it's ridiculous.
We asked the Lake Charles patients how many had suffered nerve damage, like loss of bladder control or weakness in the leg since the surgery. We then asked the patients how many have been unable to work since the devices were implanted.
We can put these in and they are stronger than a brace,
The man many of these patients blame is Dr. Arthur Steffi, the Cleveland back surgeon who developed and sold the so-called Steffi screws and plates to many surgeons. The Lake Charles patients say their surgeons then sold them on the devices.
And he said the only way that it's going to work, he said, if I use these Steffi plates, he said these things are a sure shot. Without it, you don't have a chance.
State of art. This was his presentation to me of my introduction to Steffi.
But after the surgery, the Lake Charles patients discovered to their horror that they were much worse. Their lives had changed dramatically.
Well, I was a road runner before the surgery. I was on the go all the time. But since the surgery, I can't. I can't do any of my housework.
I can't tie my shoes. It took me 6 months to learn how to go to the bathroom. Just to learn how. Because I couldn't wipe myself.
I've lost my activities with my wife. I have not slept in the same bed with my wife since my surgery of 1986.
For some, the anger has turned to tears.
I'm nothing now. I can't do anything. I can't travel. I can't stand to go across town too much. I hurt too much.
They don't know how it feels when your 6-year-old son has to come up and ask you, Daddy, is your legs hurting? And I tell him, yes. Why? Because I want to sit on your lap. And you can't let him sit on your lap because your legs are hurting too bad.
But were the problems with the Steffi devices limited to Lake Charles? Dr. Steffi was asked about the extent of the breakage problem during a malpractice deposition.
Breaks, because it's not been a problem. It's only been a problem in your cases.
Not so, according to our investigation. For example, in Philadelphia, we found many patients like this who suffered complications when screws broke following surgery. In fact, when WP had been working with 2020 on this story, aired their report last month, the station was flooded with nearly 200 calls. Most of them from Philadelphia patients complaining of painful complications.
So you got 2 broken screws.
Typical of these Philadelphia patients is Ron Rossi, a truck driver who has been in almost constant pain since the Steffi screws in his back broke in 1986. He hurts when he walks. He hurts when he's sitting down. He even hurts when he's in the whirlpool for therapy. Ron's pain was very visible during our interview with him and his wife, Kim.
When I lay down, my spine lays down. I actually feel it drop. If I was to get in bed and lay down and roll over on my back, I could actually feel my spine move. I mean, it's the pain.
Back in 1987, Ron actually tried to kill himself by swallowing a half bottle of Valium.
I felt like I was useless, worthless, and didn't have no life. And why should I be here if I'm going to be like that?
Were you surprised by this or shocked by this?
I don't know what he's going to do to himself. So I just watch him.
But who was responsible for protecting patients like Ron Rossi and those in Louisiana? There is a lot of finger pointing.
They should stop these quack doctors from doing what they're doing to people. I think it's out of control. They do what they want to.
How about the hospitals too? Aren't the hospitals supposed to get an approval on things before they're used in their facilities?
Who is the FDA? Nobody knows. Where were they at when all this was going on? This has been going on for years. Where are they at?
So how did spine plates and screws get unleashed on the public? Before a new device or an old device being proposed for a new use can be marketed, it must be approved by the Food and Drug Administration. Now, plates and screws like this have been approved for a long time for use in long bones, arms and legs. But back in the mid-1980s, Dr. Steffi and his new company called Acromed went to the FDA and asked for the device to be approved for a new use in the spine. Twice, they said no. They said that's a new, potentially dangerous use. It must be studied first for safety and effectiveness. However, just a few months later, the FDA did approve the device after Acromed simply changed the name from spine plates and screws to bone plates and screws. And Dr. Steffi now claims that meant he could use it in any bone, including the spine.
Videotape and then...
But did the FDA ever give such approval? We showed current FDA Commissioner Dr. David Kessler Dr. Steffi's video testimony when he was asked if the FDA said he could market his device for use in the spine.
There was no...
Did they say that, sir?
Yes, they did.
That is an
Okay, stop.
that is an incorrect statement.
When he said yes, they did, they never said that.
FDA never said that. In fact, we repeatedly said they could not market the device for use in the spine. We had already told them twice.
And they weren't changing their tune in this meeting.
Absolutely not.
But for years, Dr. Steffi has stuck by his claim that the FDA did give him approval after he simply changed the name to Bone Screw.
They said I could use it and could teach it and we could sell it as a bone plate and bone screw and it could be used by the physician at his discretion.
But now, for the first time, Dr. Kessler not only disputes Dr. Steffi's claim that he could use the device in the back, but Dr. Kessler makes a serious charge about what Acromed did.
It's fair to say that they circumvented the law.
You're being kindly and lawyerly, and I know you're also a lawyer, but I mean, they just literally, Tim, it sounds to me like they lied, flat and simple. They said they were going to use it in long bones for fractures. They didn't do it. Instead, they turned around and used it in the spine.
Tim, it's of enormous concern to me what happened back 1985, 1986. There is a full-scale investigation underway.
2020 has learned that Acromed is, in fact, the subject of a grand jury investigation for possible criminal violations. But the serious questions about Acromed have remained a virtual secret until now, a secret that has allowed widespread abuse and the treatment of patients with an experimental device without their knowledge.
At St. Vincent's Hospital in Cleveland, Dr. Steffi taught the procedure to hundreds of surgeons. He not only trained the doctors in Lake Charles and Philadelphia, but they have testified Dr. Steffi told them the device was approved for use in the spine. After he trained in Cleveland, Lake Charles orthopedic surgeon Dr. William Akins testified that he performed about 100 procedures in the next year. Dr. Clark Gunderson, who still practices in this building in Lake Charles, testified he did over 50 in the next year. In contrast, many experts we talked to do less than 10 screw and plate operations a year. Daryl Churn, attorney for the Lake Charles patients, said he could not believe how often the surgeons were implanting the devices.
I asked when the doctor said, well, do you mean that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you all were implanting one of these, doing one of these procedures? And they said, well, I guess that's about right.
While some of the device manufacturers limited their sales to doctors who were doing approved research studies, other companies sold to anyone who would buy. One former salesperson not with Acromed told 2020 his company encouraged him to sell unapproved devices.
I was also told, don't worry about it. Go ahead and sell it.
This kind of aggressive marketing helped to spread the operation. Today, an estimated 50 to 70,000 of these procedures are done every year. The FDA estimates up to 300,000 patients have these devices in their backs.
Here's a device that's being used that was never approved by the agency. And the best I can discern, patients didn't know that.
Patients also didn't know that some doctors had financial ties to Acromed. Ron Rossi's attorney says that Ron's orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Sanford Dabney, who testified he performed over 700 procedures, had potential conflicts of interest.
Dr. Dabney himself was a member of Acromed's medical advisory board. He held stock options in Acromed Corporation, and he himself had a financial interest in implanting and selling these screws and plates.
Once the operation had spread, the FDA conducted a largely ineffective campaign to stop unapproved use. Critics say the FDA often sent confusing or mixed signals. On the one hand, sending stern warning letters to Acromed, while at the same time tolerating repeated and obviously illegal marketing efforts. It wasn't until 1990, when Dr. Kessler took command, that the FDA got tougher. But as he himself says, by that time, the genie was out of the bottle.
This white stuff is resting right on the nerve that goes out.
Meet Dr. Arthur White, one of the leading spine surgeons in the country. Dr. White actually did one of the early studies of pedicle screws using Acromed's devices. We showed him excerpts from Dr. Kessler's interview, in which Dr. Kessler suggests Acromed circumvented the law by getting approval for a bone screw, which they then used in the spine.
I guarantee you 90% of people using pedicle screws did not know what the status was and that there was all of this problem going on, including myself.
So the company was lying to you guys too, in essence.
I think that's true, but we were thanking them for doing so because they were making these things available to us to use on our patients.
Even Dr. White admits these devices are being abused and should be limited to skilled spine surgeons. But even if a surgeon is skilled, shouldn't the patient be told that the device is not approved for use in the spine? Neither Lake Charles Memorial Hospital in Louisiana nor Thomas Jefferson University Medical Center, where Ron had his surgery, realized that the devices had never been approved for use in the spine. In fact, 2020 surveyed 18 of the most prestigious medical centers in the United States who appeared on an Acromed customer list. 13 of them either didn't know or refused to tell us whether they thought the devices were experimental. While the hospitals were under no legal obligation to know that, Attorney Churn thinks they had a moral obligation.
Oh, no question about it. The hospitals, I think, have a responsibility to ascertain that before a product comes into their hospital, that it's been properly approved by the FDA for the intended usage for which that hospital is getting the product.
And so, hospitals and doctors are still putting these devices in bags, often without telling their patients that they are experimental. Companies openly promote and sell these devices. An industry seemingly built around lies continues to flourish to the tune of over $150 million a year. And patients who were injured grow more and more angry over what they feel is at the heart of what went wrong.
It all boils down to one thing: greed. Money. They saw easy money, and they took it.
Well, Tim, then should these screws and plates never be used?
No, in the right hands, the hands of a skilled surgeon who has experience in this kind of surgery for the right reasons, such as certain surgery for tumors of the back or for certain kinds of fractures, these plates and screws can be very helpful. The problem is that when we're doing 50 to 70,000 a year, it's far too many. We've talked to many experts off the record about how many should be done a year, and nobody can say for sure, obviously, but one person said only 10% of those being done today are truly necessary. The highest estimate we could get was 50%, which would mean in the best case, even 50% are unnecessary. So obviously too many are being done.
But if you can't believe in the hospital that you're going to, then how do you know whether it should be used for you?
Well, if there was ever a mandatory case for second opinion, this is it. If the doctor says you need these plates and screws, you must seek another opinion, and not from the doctor's partner or the same hospital, from a disinterested party, because this is a case where it's a huge decision, as we obviously illustrated. You've got to get a second opinion.
Thank you, Tim.
So, what's the bottom line here? What's the moral to this story? The moral of the story is, get a second opinion. Don't go to the doctor's partner in the same hospital. Go to a disinterested party. That way, you can be safe. Back in the morning. It's what any parent would want to tell their kids. Drink your milk. And kids are doing nowadays. We all drink milk for calcium and for our bones. But what if I told you that years ago, there was a drug being used in the milk? I don't want to scare you guys into drinking the milk, dumping it out in the trash can, wasting blah, 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 blah. But this is from years ago. A pasteurized drug that was used in the cows. Was the FDA part of this? And what's going to happen now with all the milk? Here's Lynn Shure.
Talk about sacred cows. Is there any food considered more healthful, more dependable, more untouchable than milk? And who better than America's most wholesome TV family, Ozzie and Harriet, to sell it?
Boy, those kids sure have a lot of vitality.
No wonder they all drink milk. With that kind of blessing as its heritage, little wonder that the minute someone started tinkering with the liquid version of American purity, it got some people very upset.
We're going to be dumping milk across this country in the months ahead.
They are protesting the use of a synthetic hormone injected in cows to increase milk production. The hormone is known as BGH, for bovine growth hormone. It is also called BST, for bovine somatotropin. And it's a genetically engineered version of a natural substance produced by the cows themselves. But the product has set off an angry debate, with consumers questioning the safety of the hormones, and one group buying a full-page newspaper ad urging the public to speak out. It's been on the air.
The whole country is up in arms over milk.
And in the streets.
There's no consumer benefit.
And some companies have joined the protest. Ben & Jerry's has announced it will not use products from treated cows in its ice cream. Other dairies have said they won't use it for their milk products either. Monsanto, the giant chemical company that developed the hormone, says 13 years of testing prove the milk from treated cows remains as safe and wholesome as ever. But that hasn't convinced everyone. Dr. Michael Hansen is a biologist with Consumers Union's Policy Institute.
We're talking about a drug that they want to inject into cows, which causes them to get sicker, but it has no therapeutic benefit. It doesn't cure a disease. It doesn't help the cows in any way. It only increases the production of a commodity that we already have enough of, and that's milk.
This agency is convinced that this is a safe and effective product.
Linda Sudam is with the Food and Drug Administration, which approved the use of BST 4 months ago. But FDA approval means little to some, like this group of concerned parents.
The reason this is such an issue really, and with mothers perhaps this is such an emotional issue, is milk is really a food standard in almost every family. My children have milk first thing in the morning. They have it for lunch. They have chocolate milk. Milk is the one thing that is standard from morning until evening.
But what is it you're concerned about?
What is the good end result? So cows can suffer, so people can have possible side effects, long-term effects.
I would just rather they not experiment with human beings. We're finding that the less stuff is in our food, the better, and that much we know.
This product is dangerous to human health.
Critics are concerned that the drug is so new, no one really knows what the long-term health effects might be. Short-term, they say there is a documented potential problem. Some cows injected with BST develop an infection of the udder known as mastitis. Antibiotics are used to treat the infection. And at a time of rising concern about the reduced effectiveness of antibiotics on human disease, the fear is the antibiotics used on the cow could be passed into the milk itself.
And if someone drinks that milk, that could make any bacteria in them less susceptible to that antibiotic that's in the milk.
Which means you have a tougher time if you get a disease that needs antibiotics for treatment.
Right. You would have a tougher time. You would have to take either higher levels of antibiotics or different ones.
Even with an increase in mastitis, there is no health risk because milk is the most regulated food commodity. We test every tanker full of milk.
What they're not telling you is the wide test that is used throughout the country only picks up penicillin and 3 other penicillin-like drugs. It does not pick up the majority of other drugs that are out there and that can be used.
Other groups, like the American Medical Association, say the hormone is an important scientific breakthrough that could help alleviate world food problems. And they maintain it is harmless.
The end product is safe. It's as safe as drinking milk that comes from cows that weren't treated with this.
You don't feel any qualms in this case?
Well, let me put it this way. I will drink milk from bovine somatotreated cows. I will encourage my children to have no fear. And if I had any grandchildren, I wouldn't have any hesitation about them drinking the milk.
I have a 6-year-old boy, and this is nonsense.
These parents, however, do have hesitations.
There's absolutely no reason to be risking something we don't know the long-term results of, and to be experimenting with our children. It's just crazy.
So it's about the unknown, is what you're saying.
It's difficult to be an educated mother with this issue. How do you educate yourself? They don't label the milk. I mean, why don't they label the milk? You go to the grocery store, you buy a can of peas. What does it say? Peas, water, salt. The salt may be harmful to you. You don't know, but at least you know it's in there. You have a choice as a consumer. If I can't inform myself by looking at a container of milk and saying, yes, this is RBGH, or no, this is not, how can I choose? I'm not an informed consumer.
Becoming an informed consumer is difficult. Well, it's estimated that 10 to 15% of all cows will be treated by year's end. It's hard to know if the milk you're buying now comes from those cows. We visited a number of supermarkets in suburban New York and found almost no mention of treated cows.
This is exactly what they're complaining about. There is no way to tell from this display or from even looking at the cartons whether this milk or any of the milk here comes from cows that were treated. So in effect, consumers simply don't have a choice.
There are some products with labels, but the ones we found are only in selected markets and are a lot more expensive.
So this is the only brand that's labeled in this supermarket, but it's $2.19 compared to 79 cents for a quart.
Cost aside, the FDA insists labeling could be misleading.
Mandatory labeling would require us to say that there was something different from with the product.
But the cow has been treated.
The cow has been treated, there's no doubt. But
So
the
it's
end
a product of an animal that's been treated differently.
The end product is what would need to be labeled. And our standard, our law says, is there a difference in the end product? And there isn't.
The government says it's a science issue, and that this time the science works. But consumers who don't believe them hope treated cows will become as obsolete as the milkman.
Lynn, the FDA representative says that none of this goes into the milk, but the added antibiotics is necessary with this other treatment.
For the cows that are sick,
yeah, it does.
Well, she said that they do test and they generally catch what they have to catch, but she admitted the testing is not foolproof, number one. Number two, people simply don't trust the government, and particularly the FDA. They've said a lot of things were good for us that turned out to be not so good for us.
But why would the FDA object to labeling if it is indeed harmful?
They don't want the labels to be misleading. They don't want people to claim that milk from untreated cows is better for them because they say there's no difference. By the same token, expect to see more labels on milk and other products coming from cows that were not treated in the future.
Yes. Thank you, Lynn.
All right. So, if there's any questions, do some research beforehand. That way, you can understand about the milk that you drink. Speaking of food scams, when we come back, do your kids drink apple juice? Do you eat the maple syrup? A food scam gone wild with Brian Ross. Stay with us. Do you buy the foods that make you say it's maple syrup or whatever? But what if we told you that? What if we told you probably the most popular drink ever that I'm drinking right now, apple juice? You may think you're buying your kids 100% pure apple juice. Now, I'm not scaring you of buying apple juice until you see this next story. Tests that have been done. Science into this. A visit to plants and the tree to have that pure maple syrup. That's right, we gotcha! Here's Brian Ross.
If you're happy and you know it, you really want to show it. If you're happy and you know it, you'll try it.
When playtime is over, 2.5-year-old Jesse always knows what he wants.
He wants apple juice, the box. That's what he said. Apple juice, the box.
For Jillian's parents, it's the idea of something all natural for their daughter to drink.
It's wholesome, hopefully, and we prefer that she has that than something like Kool-Aid or something which has a lot of sugar.
And Griffin's parents pay extra to make sure he gets 100% pure apple juice.
It's either apple juice or water. We go through at least, I would say, 2 or 3 boxes this size a day.
But someone's been trying to cheat these children and their parents, and children and parents across the country.
I don't want the kids drinking that, no. They paid for 100% apple juice and they didn't get it.
So this is not what it says it is?
No.
What do you say about that?
Adulterated.
Hundreds of thousands of gallons of some of the most popular, best-selling apple juices in America adulterated. Allegedly doctored by overseas suppliers. In a scheme uncovered only after a wide-ranging 4-month 2020 investigation. An investigation that took advantage of 2 new state-of-the-art scientific tests that can detect crooks in the juice and food business who until now were virtually undetectable.
This is cutting-edge technology. This is as close to the edge as you'll ever get.
Dr. Alan Browse, one of the country's leading authorities on food adulteration, who worked with us in our investigation, says it all comes down to greed.
The crooks make out. They sell a product that's not real and they make a ton of money. And they laugh all the way to the bank.
And they think what, they can sneak it past you, past the labs of...
They did for a long time, didn't they?
Our investigation into crooks and fraud in the food business actually began not with apple juice, but with maple syrup. In the maple syrup state, Vermont.
Pure Vermont maple syrup.
But Reg Muir, a big Vermont maple syrup enthusiast and businessman, found things here weren't so pure when he began asking questions about a new competitor whose maple syrup prices were just too low to make any sense.
When someone can sell it for less than what it costs to make, you become suspicious.
Which is what led Reg Muir all the way to France, where, like Vermont, the quality of food and drink are a source of great pride, and where in the last few years, this food chemist, Dr. Gilles Martin, has put a lot of food crooks on the run.
People who are cheating on food have become clever, more and more clever.
But not clever enough to fool Dr. Martin's new high-tech test, which is now used by governments from Paris to Washington.
This product is mostly made of beet sugar.
Dr. Martin's maple syrup tests quickly confirmed the suspicions of Reg Muir back in Vermont. Maple syrup, including that sold under the LL Bean name at a premium price for its supposedly premium quality, full of beet sugar, sugar from beets.
And as far as I know, beet don't grow on maples.
According to the test results, about 65% beet sugar, which other tests cannot detect.
It was a form of theft, absolute outright theft.
So until you came along and decided to pursue this, there was really no way to know.
None whatsoever.
Muir is now suing the suspect company, American Maple Products of Newport, Vermont, which has gone out of business. And its owner, Roger Ames, who denied to us that he had ever adulterated any maple syrup, is under federal investigation. How long did this go on? From 83 to 94. But one of the former employees, Wayne Lucas, says his boss was so sure he would never get caught that bags of beet sugar can be seen out in the open in snapshots taken of the maple syrup plant. That's the bag. That's the beet sugar. What do you think would have happened if they hadn't come up with that new test over in France? Each still be billionaires. As for LL Bean, a spokesperson told us it had not known its syrup had been adulterated until we told them, and that since 1994, it has had another supplier, which, by the way, we also tested and found to be pure maple.
It can be very difficult to identify when a food is adulterated. Looks the same, may taste the same, may feel the same, but it's not what you expect.
And Dr. Michael Jacobson of the Consumer Group Center for Science in the Public Interest says food crooks who adulterate products are getting rich doing it.
It's outrageous. People are being gypped, totally gypped.
That doesn't kill you. It's not going to hurt you, right?
That's right. It's harmless.
So what's wrong with that?
People are being cheated. People are paying maple syrup prices for beet sugar and water.
And it happens with all kinds of foods. In one of the best-known cases in the 1980s, Beechnut was discovered to be selling apple juice adulterated with sugar and water, and one of its top executives was sent to jail. And just last month in California, laboratory tests found some very expensive, supposedly pure Italian olive oil to actually be 90% cheaper oils, soybean, corn, and cottonseed oil.
And this is the kind of thing that no consumer can detect on his own or her own. You need a very sophisticated chemistry lab to detect this kind of substitution.
Which is why we commissioned some of our own tests at Dr. Martin's lab in France, starting with some more maple syrup. This bottle of A&P's premium house brand, purchased at an A&P store in Atlanta.
In this case, it is not pure maple syrup. It contains added sugar.
About 10% added sugar, at least for the batch this bottle came from. A&P and its suppliers told us they stand by the syrup, that their blend includes syrup 6 or 7 years old, which can be mistaken for added sugar, something Dr. Martin and other top experts told us is just not true. A&P might be interested to know that when we tested the syrup its supplier markets under its own label, that came out 100% pure. Next, we tested this vanilla, bought at a Sam's Club store in Atlanta.
This product is almost water and alcohol.
15 times weaker than any vanilla Dr. Martin had ever seen. Not illegal, but something the new company owner admitted to us is true and now plans to fix. And then Holland House Red cooking wine, purchased at a store in New York City.
This product contains about 2/3 of water and sugar.
The manufacturer, the big Cadbury's food company, says only its cooking wine meets all federal requirements.
Well, I think in this, I'm probably one of the people who's been duped, because this label looks very familiar, and I think I'll
That's
find
in your
it.
kitchen.
I think I'll find it in my kitchen. You would assume that it's really 100% red cooking wine. They're cheating people on a massive scale.
But it was when we set out last month to test apple juice, the second best-selling juice in America after orange juice, a staple of nursery schools and playgrounds everywhere, that we found the most surprising and serious pattern of apparent food fraud and adulteration.
Since then, the apple business has gone berserk.
Because of
What you've done, yeah.
This time, we took our samples to a lab outside Washington run by Dr. Alan Brous, who told us he had sent a letter last June warning the apple juice industry that with the price of apples skyrocketing, there were adulteration problems in the imported juice concentrate most American companies rely on.
We were starting to see sweeteners added, both the product from China, Argentina, and Germany.
After you sent out that letter, that warning, was there any reaction?
A little bit, but not much.
But there was plenty of reaction after the results came back from the test Dr. Brous's lab conducted for us, leading to the eventual discovery that 6 top American apple juice companies had adulterated juice on their hands. This is the report you sent us on sample number 3. Dr. Brous knew our samples only by number and found sample number 3 adulterated by 12% with a sugar additive. How bad is that?
Shouldn't have any.
Shouldn't have any.
No. That means 12% of the solids in there came from sweetener that's been added to it.
The sweetener, a high fructose sugar syrup called fructuline, produced in Northern Europe, cost about half of what apple juice concentrate does. It's clear to you that sample number 3 has been adulterated.
Crystal clear.
No doubt about it?
No doubt about it.
You're sure of that?
Absolutely.
This is what sample number 3 really is.
Juicy juice.
A product of the Nestle Company, which owned Beechnut in the 1980s when Beechnut's apple juice was found to be adulterated.
More people should have learned from it.
Have they?
Obviously not.
No one at Nestle headquarters in California would agree to appear on 2020. But within days of our first phone calls to Nestle, the company recalled an unspecified amount of its suspect juicy juice from warehouses and said that from now on, it would use the same test we had used to prevent it from becoming a victim of bad suppliers.
Nestle is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They should be routinely checking their products.
Does it surprise you this could happen again, given what happened with Beechnut in the 1980s?
Well, it certainly says something about the corporate culture of Nestle if they didn't institute better practices, better procedures.
But it's not just Nestle's juicy juice. According to industry and government sources, adulterated supplies have been found in the inventories of Mott's, McCain's, Quaker Oats, Cumberland Farms, and Minute Maid. Last week, Coca-Cola, which produces Minute Maid, took legal action, filing a lawsuit against 3 European suppliers, which Coca-Cola says had sold it more than 400,000 gallons of adulterated apple juice since last fall.
Is it as bad as you've ever seen it in terms of as bad as I've ever seen it, yes.
This week, the FDA announced it, too, was investigating what Dr. Brous first discovered in our 2020 apple juice investigation.
As long as the economics work, the sugar is cheaper than the fruit, there'll always be somebody wanting to add it.
That's what they've done here.
That's what they've done, yes.
The FDA says there is no health threat whatsoever. But health risk or not, what we found in our 2020 investigation was very upsetting to the parents of these big apple juice consumers in New York City.
Infuriating. To quote for the box, and remember they're only kids once, so give them 100% with juicy juice. And I mean, the whole back of the box, the little write-up is infuriating.
You didn't get what you paid for. You paid for 100% juice, you didn't get it. That's theft. People who made the decisions, who knowingly made the decisions to do this, have to be held accountable. If they have no fear of that, then it'll just continue.
Brian, that really is outrageous. Now, I understand there are products that are pure, as they say they are. How do you know? You're standing in the supermarket. How do you know which ones are not what they say they are?
Well, Hugh, the source of the problem right now seems to be overseas apple juice concentrate, and we're told that in particular, for the moment, Germany and Eastern Europe are 2 countries to steer clear of. And on the side of apple juice boxes, it does show the country of origin.
How widespread is this fraud?
This seems to be a big problem. More than half of all the apple juice in this country comes from overseas. In fact, just this week, the state of Florida did the same test we did and found 2 more companies also selling adulterated apple juice.
Right. Are you more likely to get what it claims to be if the source is in America?
That's the best bet as far as we've been told, that USA is the best way to go in terms of pure, 100% pure apple juice.
Fascinating finding. It's amazing what lengths competition can drive companies to. Thank you, Brian.
So what are you getting for? I'll tell you in the second half. But when we come back, viral break. Stay with me. Okay, I'll say this once and only once. Food companies are killing us. Read some labels and you may think, oh, this is how much fat and calories, this is how much sugar. It's ridiculous. For example, would you buy your kids this Mott's apple juice, 100% pure apple juice? No sugar added, 120% DV vitamin C? Total sugar is 28 grams. When it says no sugar added, I mean, is it to scam people? Probably not. They say no sugar added, but if you add in sugar, that's just too much for your body to handle. But I'm really thinking, because I love apple juice. Really, I really do. Let me ask you, are you scaring people by not buying apple juice and milk? Of course not. As consumers, we need to question what we buy. Like if you're buying apple juice, you need to understand if there's sugar added or no sugar added. I mean, if you got questions, write a letter to the company and say, do you add sugar in it? I mean, it's 100% juice. Soda has 0% juice, because it has 5 fructose corn syrup. And what we saw here, it's really a great test to do. So, as I say, if you have any questions about this, you can talk to some experts out there, do some tests, and maybe then you'll know that that juice is 100% pure, and maple syrup, it's really up to you. Now, I don't want to scare you making you hungry here, but what we have to understand here is food companies may be killing us or trying to help us. That's probably the bottom line here. Well, I would do viral break, but we're almost out of time. But coming up, here's a preview of what's coming up on the second half of the show. And I think you may be interested, and I think you guys may be interesting. Maybe interesting to y'all. Take a look.
Tonight, chiropractors. Some are treating children for almost everything. Lots of parents trust them.
And you haven't had any infection since.
But there's another side. Our hidden cameras checked out many chiropractors. Wait till you see what we found. Bizarre treatments, conflicting advice, doctors who test the mother when the child is the patient.
What we're doing right now is I'm testing her muscles for him.
This child, paralyzed after visiting the chiropractor. They use their techniques on baby's bones. Is this good science or just good business? If you care about your children, you can't afford to miss John Stossel's eye-opening investigation. Handle with care.
And you'll handle with care on the second half of this broadcast. Coming up on the second half, handle with care, an investigation into chiropractors. That's on the second half. If I don't see it on the second half, we could do it on Friday. Coming up on Friday, I'm going to find a very special food break. Becky Bakes is going to come here, and we're going to look at some pies and cookies. Some sweet treats for you. If you're interested in those sweet treats from Becky Bakes here in Corpus Christi. We could do this at her place. We could do it. We won't know. But if it does happen, it will. It probably will. So we'll have that for you on Friday. We're also going to be off on Thursday, but we're back in next Thursday for our Give America Back Thursday. So that's it for the first half of the show. I'll see you on the second half. If not, I'll see you on Friday. For everyone here at YouTube, I'll see you later.